All right, friends, welcome back to another episode of Trades Talk. I am super excited to dive into this because this is a topic I am extremely passionate about, and I know you are too. It's profitability. So we have Ben Hansen, the Profit Doctor, on the podcast today. Ben, welcome to the show.
Justin, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to jumping right in and helping some of your listeners maybe improve their profitability in the next 30 days.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to share some ideas. We're going to talk. We're going to swap some stories. So let's start with this, Ben. I just would love for the audience to get a little bit of background. You've done some amazing things in your career, worked at some incredible companies. Would you mind giving us the elevator pitch on your background?
Sure. My background was mostly in technology, sales and marketing, Dell, Microsoft, some startups. And then I left Microsoft to start my own consulting company, doing what I say as selling what I used to buy to the people I used to work with. And that was marketing, consulting, and staffing back to Microsoft. Did that for about 10 years, was awarded by Inc. magazine 5 years in a row as one of the fastest growing companies in the United States. Grew that from essentially zero to $13 million in revenue and 100 employees in about 8 years. Did some pretty dang good things to generate a lot of cash flow and profitability for myself, and did some not so smart things. And I exited that business, and I really thought, hey, what could I do to give back and be a contribution? And I realized that I had, I believe, a gift for sifting through the complexity of a lot of information, like a new business or someone else's business, and helping them improve the profitability. I've always been begin with the end in mind. And for me, the end of business was almost always like focusing on profitability. So I think I've got a superpower in helping people with their profitability. And so that's what I do now. The business is called Profit Doctor. And we love working with 7- and 8-figure CEO owners who want to improve the profitability of their business. In many cases, what we see are business owners who are doing pretty good on revenue, millions of dollars of revenue, but they're not taking home hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for themselves. And so we help, as we say, underpaid entrepreneurs become overpaid.
I love that quote. There's a bit of a thing in the entrepreneurial world that I see, especially in the trades, where the harder you work and the less money you take home, it's almost like a badge of honor. And you kind of say, oh man, if my employees only knew how little I actually made. And I feel like we need to change the narrative and stop feeling guilty for making money in the trades. So I'm really excited to talk about this. Do you find that?
Let me jump in there. There's like two or three things you said that were really teeing up some of my favorite conversations. Yes. I really want to bring this down to like super nuts and bolts. So I think why so many business owners may like think of it as a badge of honor to like work and not take home a lot of money. And also with this idea is that we need to grow and more revenue, more customers, more scale, more employees is going to solve the problem. Because I think that these Silicon Valley unicorn VC-backed startups have taken over the popular consciousness. And so somehow a landscaper with 10 trucks in Kansas City thinks that they should do what got Google or Yahoo or Zoom over the finish line. And I guess what I would say is the game that those guys are playing in Silicon Valley, let's call that hockey. The hockey playbook is not the playbook for people who are, swinging hammers in the trades, landscaping. Those guys are playing football. They're not playing hockey. And I think just too much of the popular media has somehow glorified, we'll call it the sport of hockey, software as a service, unicorns out of Silicon Valley. And that just has very, very little to do with what helps business owners win on, let's just say, Main Street. The 98% of companies where they actually need to turn a profit. And success is generated by profitability, not growth, actually, as it turns out.
Can you say more about that? Success is generated?
so much. Um, you know, the those Silicon Valley guys, if you will, they are often evaluated in terms of a sale as a multiple of revenue.
Yep.
And they also often have a nearly unlimited bank account to spend to grow, grow, grow. So if you're the next televideo internet platform like Zoom or Google Meets or something like that, and you're trying to take over that space, your VC is thinking, we're going to invest, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars with a hope that this company becomes the number 1, 2, or 3 player in this space. And then we can have a pop on Wall Street or sell it to a big company like Google or Microsoft. And that sale will be valued on some future projection of like capturing the market. Well, I've got to tell you, if you got a $50 million plumbing company in Nashville, nothing that I just said has almost any applicability to what's going on over there. If you are going to sell that company, they are not going to evaluate that based on where you're going to be in like 5 years. They're not going to be generally valuing it primarily based on how much revenue you have. It is going to be a multiple typically of your net profitability. And, that Silicon Valley, those guys are all losing money. Like that big, SpaceX IPO, the earnings per share doesn't even compute because they're not making any money per share. They're a $2 trillion valuation company with negative profitability. I'm going to tell you, if you're a negative profitability plumbing company in Nashville, you don't have an asset that you can sell, really. You have a boat anchor that somebody needs to do a lot of surgery on in order to flip things around so that there is a profit, so that it does become an asset, so that somebody would want to buy it. You wound me up on one of my favorite topics. Just point me in a direction from that. We'll keep going.
I love it. So, well, this is what I love talking about. I think a lot of people also will listen to what you just said and say, well, I'm not looking to sell my business, so I'm not too worried about profitability right now because, I don't need to sell. And I have an answer to that, but then I want you to give me your answer to that. Why is running a profitable business important at all times? Not just
you go first. You go first.
Well,
come on.
My answer is you should always run a business that's ready to sell. And you should do this as a favor to those you love and care about. Because if you're an owner and you're the majority owner of a business and you were to pass away in a tragic accident or something were to happen to you, God forbid, your family, your spouse, your employees, people will need to liquidate or at least transact that asset to access your estate and access the wealth that you've built for them. And if that asset is not sellable, and most of our balance sheets are very much focused in our personal businesses, then you're doing a disservice to those who you love and care about. That's my real meaning, is like you should always have a business that's sellable. Unless you're liquid 10 million in the bank, then maybe that's a different story. But I think that's a very small percentage of the trade industry. It's definitely not my story.
Yeah. What you just said reminds me of one of my clients. Brian is what we refer to him to maintain a little bit of his anonymity. When he came to me back in 2022, he was having trouble sleeping. He was having anxiety and panic attacks. His company was losing $20,000 a month, and he was really, really struggling. And over the next 2 years, we worked together, and we pretty much followed what we call the profit prescription, which we can get into in a little bit. And through that process, he turned that business from negative $20,000 a month to positive $20,000 a month. And I'll never forget, he came over for lunch. This is about 2 years after we started working. And he told me how well the business was doing and how he was sleeping, and the panic attacks and the anxiety had really reduced, because he was the number one breadwinner for his family of 5, and he was, he's basically on the ropes, hemorrhaging cash with no cushion when we first met. And later on, it was like, wait a minute, now I am the owner of a company that's actually an asset and things are going a lot better. But after he told me how it was going, what really just, struck a chord for me is he said, hey, I just left the doctor and they said I need to go in for open heart surgery to sort out some stuff that he had. And
Wow.
there's a real risk that you don't wake up from that, right?
Yeah.
And well, nobody wants to go through that. I think he felt such a relief, and I felt so proud that as he was going into that, his company wasn't like a, life force sucking boat anchor dragging
Yep.
him down, but arguably it's a bit of a life raft at that point. It was like a source of strength, both for him personally, like physically and emotionally. And I mean, if he didn't come out of it, or maybe more likely, maybe he came out of it, but his ability to, function as a CEO was dramatically reduced, he's got something for his family and himself there. Whereas literally 2 years before that, I mean, his family, pretty much would have been on welfare if they were stuck with that kind of company because it was going nowhere.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a powerful story. And it just reminds us that we don't have all the time in the world, and your profit issues and your profit problems should not be something you kick down the road, and it's something to face today. So Ben, we're going to get I want to go right into this. I want to be vulnerable.
Okay.
At the end of 2024, we were a $20 million landscape company doing about $2.5 million of net profit. It was a nice spot to be. So a little over 10%, coming up on let's say, call it 12% net profit, close to that 15, 16% of EBITDA, an amazing business. And so going into 2025, what do? You start investing in growth. You start hiring a few more people, building out a sales team. And then Q1 of 2025, if anyone in the trades remember, last year was really, really slow for almost all construction industries. And so our revenue dropped year over year in comparison to 24 versus 25 in Q1. And we actually lost about $650,000 in 3 months. That's our posted negative profitability. And I read some of your stuff about not having bad months, and man, I completely agree, because for the last 12 months, we have been working our ass off to just, on a trailing 12 perspective, get rid of that giant black eye. And we finally climbed out of the hole here in Q1 of 2026, but we're not necessarily in a spot that we're super profitable. We're running between 3 and 5% net profit, and we are struggling to climb back up to that 10 or 12% profit margin. We've increased revenue, we've increased gross profit. We're back on the growth train, but all of our costs are going up as quick or quicker than our gross profit and our for sure our revenue. So in that kind of storyline, going from a really nice profitable business, we went from 20 to now 25 million in revenue, but our profit is actually only about $1 million on a trailing 12. When we were 20 million, it was well over 2 million. So profits cut in half, even though we've added 20% to our revenue. A lot of information I just threw at you, and I just kind of want to work this with you if you're open to it. I think it'd be beneficial for the listeners.
So if we were, at the doctor's office and you're the patient and you come in and I'm the doctor and you just walk me through your symptoms or your medical history, if you will, and you're looking for me to give you a preliminary diagnosis, we have a term for your situation and we call that profititis. So like tendinitis, profititis.
Yeah.
And what we call that, or the sort of the definition that we use on there, is when top line or revenue or sales is generally healthy and or growing, but bottom line is weak, sick, anemic, because it is either staying the same, like revenue is going up while profit is sort of going flat, or often going down.
Yeah.
And what we see is that, remember when I was talking about the hockey versus football, so many CEOs are spending, let's just say 150% of their time. Number one, I don't know if we're allowed to swear, but
Yep.
fixing broken shit,
Yeah.
fighting fires, and or focusing on growth and revenue. And what they're not doing is they're not doing, let's just say spending 20 to 25% of their time optimizing for profitability. And I would argue that if whatever that is, almost 2.5 years ago now, if you were the guy who's like, okay, Monday morning, we have a senior leader meeting where we talk about profitability. And then each of the senior leaders have an hour on their calendar to handle go-dos associated with profitability. And on a monthly or twice a month basis or weekly basis, we have a profit-centric monthly financial review. I would hypothesize that you would not have dug that hole so deep. You would have turned things around quicker. So in our programs that we work with 7- and 8-figure companies to help them improve profitability, one of the things we do is have essentially like so many threads, but one is to have essentially an early warning radar where, you detect if all of a sudden the plane starts losing altitude, you want to know that before the ground wakes you up, right?
Yeah.
And then the second part of that is, I don't want to put too many words in your mouth, but it wouldn't shock me that you guys were like revenue rather than profit.
100%.
And yeah, I'll give you one free piece of consulting. You use the word gross profit, and I think I would work with my accounting team to replace that with contribution margin. And that might be a good segue for your next question if you wanted to.
And let's define contribution margin.
So I was just talking with the CEO of about a $20 million company. And it's a heavily service-oriented business, labor-oriented business. Like 50% of the cost of what they're delivering is labor, which probably is a lot like everybody who's listening to this podcast here.
Yep.
And so when they were doing a lot of their analysis, they were looking at gross profit. And the way that they were calculating that is sales minus the hard cost of stuff to deliver that work. So if you're a plumber, I'm just going to say the cost of toilets and pipes and fittings and, bags of concrete to patch stuff up and maybe fuel or I don't know, stuff like that. But if you're a plumber or in landscaping or this guy that I was talking to the other day, the actual labor to do that work is 50% of the cost of the work. So many people in their P&L or in their thinking on things are looking at gross profit where they're essentially taking revenue minus hard costs like materials, maybe fuel, some stuff like that, but often not the cost of their labor. Now, number one, the first thing is to load into that calculation the cost of all your variable labor. So for me, if I ran your business and I had crews out in the field, I don't know how you guys do it, but let's say 20 million, let's say you've got 30 trucks. I don't know. And on probably 40 trucks. I don't know, 50 trucks. And on each truck is, 1 to 4 people, and they go someplace and they start doing some work. I'm thinking landscaping, like mowing and edging. That might not be what you guys do.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Okay. So I would take all those guys that ride around in the trucks and I would load them into the variable cost. So I would be not talking about just the materials, gasoline and that little fishing line and fixing mowers and stuff, but I would slide into that all the maintenance on those mowers and the new mowers and the 5 guys in each of those 50 trucks and the gasoline. I'd probably put the cost of the leases of those trucks and the insurance for those trucks. And if people paid me with credit cards, I'd put the credit card processing fees in there. And I would shove all of the stuff. So like if you sell 20 million, you have a certain set of costs. Let's say next year you sold 22 million. What else in your accounting would go up by a chunk? that is essentially variable costs. I would try to slot as much of that as possible into the calculation to get to what's called contribution margin. Contribution margin means if I sell another $1 million of this, how much extra, we'll call it gravy, actually comes out of that after covering all the costs that it took to deliver that work that I could use to maybe cover my corporate office or my fat cat CEO salary or the cost of my accountant or something like that.
Yeah, this is so great. You're breaking it down like this. This is what I would call unit cost economics, understanding truly what it costs for a team of 4 to go out and maintain something for 1 hour. And you know, it's funny you mentioned this because some of the prescriptions we've put in place to get back into a better spot, and it sounds like it would have been good to talk to you a year ago, are some of what you're saying, right? Like today we have that monthly meeting. I used to, either myself or our controller used to stand up there for 2 hours and go through every single line of business and explain why we're doing well or not well and profitable or not profitable. And about 3 months ago, I said to my COO, John, I go, why are we up here? We need the divisional leaders who are running these service lines to get up here and tell us how they're doing. And that has been an incredible change in the way we are able to have ownership of that P&L in each of our service lines. And that's one of those things that you mentioned, that monthly meeting is an incredibly powerful meeting to say, how did we do last month? Where are we going to be next month? And we do kind of like a 90-day look ahead to see, hey, do we have any of these negative months potentially showing up? And then how do we fix those? Yeah. And that's kind of leading to my next question is a lot of people are looking at this and saying, look, you know, Ben and Justin, I hear what you're saying. I'm doing what I can. I'm measuring it. But at the end of the day, there's just no money left over. You know, Ben, where do we start when we don't have that profitability in our business? And what are like the first couple actions that you would recommend taking? And this is speaking in generalities, of course.
Yeah. I do want to get back to that part you mentioned about the monthly financial review and divisional heads and stuff. So maybe cue that up to come back to the idea that there's no, you know, as they say, we've got too much month at the end of the money, or we're not making we're not making any profitability. And where's it coming from? And so what's the first thing to do, if you will? The first thing to realize, I would say, is in that case, you have a profitability problem. And so many times we see business owners thinking they have a revenue problem. And so if you have a revenue problem, the obvious solution is to go sell more stuff. If you have a profitability problem, the solution to that is not necessarily to go sell more stuff. It's typically to fix your profit problem. And the first best way to fix a profit problem is, number one, to recognize you have one. Cue the music for our profit leaks detector, which we could talk about later. And then secondly, once you identify that you have a profitability problem, is to designate some time, say an hour or 2 on your calendar for you and or a couple of your senior managers to start working on that. And so I call that Money Monday. And does it have to be Monday? Sorry, does it have to be Monday? Yeah. No, but Money and Monday rhymes better than Money Wednesday, so that's why I call it Money Monday. And the idea is on your calendar to literally put, we'll just say a 90-minute block every week for you and a couple of your senior leaders, if you have a leadership team, to literally focus on profitability. How can we cut costs? How can we stop doing stuff that's losing us money? How can we shift and reallocate our energies and investments into things that are higher margin, better profitability? How can we fix our reporting or financials or accounting so I can see what the heck is going on? You know, so many business owners really have a good handle on revenue. They know the revenue by client. They know the revenue by location and product type and family and cluster and all these kind of things, but they don't really know profitability. Some of them maybe know gross profit, but as I just described earlier, gross profit versus contribution margin, It's just gross profit is somewhere between misleading and useless. And contribution margin can be a highly effective tool to help people. So the number one tool, or the number one thing to do, is recognizing, do I have a profit problem, distinct from do I have a revenue problem? And then if I have, actually for everybody, but certainly if you have a profit problem, to implement your own version of Money Mondays, where you have time on your calendar to, get away from fixing broken stuff and chasing operational problems and sell, to like, wait a minute, how do I make some changes in my business so that my business is fundamentally more profitable?
So just that tweak going, should I say, just that focus 1 hour a week with your leadership team, you have seen that have a improvement on profit in businesses.
For sure. And I'll characterize it as compared to the alternative. The alternative is we don't think about profit, but we're surprised that profit sucks. Well, I mean, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you don't have time on your calendar, then it's not really happening, And if you're not setting that like a stake in the ground with you and your team, that we're going to focus on that, they are going to do what you're incenting them or encouraging them or rewarding them for, which today is probably revenue and is probably not profit.
I would say that's true. I think we have a outsized focus on revenue, and a lot of our industries have some level of the top 100 or the top 500 or the top 150 companies. And how do they determine those companies? Well, it's strictly on revenue.
So I do revenue. Yeah.
I think we've, the corporate world has done a disservice to entrepreneurs by over incentivizing or maybe just over honoring revenue and not really focusing or talking about profit. I think a big reason why people don't want to talk about profit, I just told, however many thousands of people that are going to listen to this podcast exactly what my profitability was for the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm not worried about that because I tell my entire team on a monthly basis. So we have very much open book financials. What's your take on that? I'm going to come back to this monthly financial talk, but what about sharing profitability with your team, and what's your take on the whole idea of open book management?
So there's a great book called The Great Game of Business, and I think it's Bo Burlingame, and he's a big advocate or proponent of open book management. And I'll say I don't have a blanket recommendation or opinion on is open book management a win for your company or not. And just so we're clear, open book management might mean like showing everybody, including the guy who, third on the hierarchy in that truck mowing lawns, here's my P&L, might even include here's what my salary and take home is as the owner of the company. In many cases, they are so far away from necessarily being ready for that probably not that great of an idea. And I generally, it's not a core recommendation for me to recommend focusing on, quote, open book management. But it is a strong recommendation for me to, as a business, think about profitability. And there's a lot of, I'm going to call them proxy measurements of profitability, like margin or contribution margin or spread between, cost and what it takes to deliver, or having a delivery budget. If you were doing larger landscape projects, and maybe you do, like a $200,000 or $2 million engagement where you come and tune up the whole thing and plant the plants and redo the stonework and I don't know, all that stuff, there would likely be an estimate. Let's say it's 200,000. And then in there in the back of your mind or in your calculation, you'd be like, okay, we've got a labor budget of, if we're going to sell it for 200, I don't know, $60,000 worth of, stone and plants and dirt and whatnot. And then $60,000 worth of labor. And then the rest is supposed to be our margin or something. So $60,000 of labor divided by what your costs are. Let's say that's 200 labor hours went into your bid. The question is, are the guys delivering that work, do they know that it's 200 labor hours to complete that project? When they're 50 labor hours in, do you tell them, hey, you're 50 labor hours in, are you a quarter of the way through the work? How about at 100? How about at 150? How about at 200, right? And
Yep.
so, man, I kind of lost track of the question, but I think I answered it.
Yeah, no, this is wherever we're
Oh,
at.
open
This
book
is,
management.
yes.
The point is maybe proxies for profitability is a good example of how you can get, we'll just say 80 to 90% of everything good out of open book management with only, with a lot less of the potential downside or headache if you can give people not just make it about revenue, but there's like a budget to deliver the service. Or when we sell something, we need to keep in track of costs so that we're managing our pricing, for example. So common that business owners will incentivize sales reps on revenue and to give that sales rep the ability to discount. And then they're like, if I take 10% off, will you buy it this second? Yes. Okay, great. But if your net profit margin is 5%, you just lost money on that deal. So, you gotta handle that properly.
Yeah. So many great points. I think one point I just want to double click on is that idea of labor hours. And in the trades, especially with fixed price or proposed work, recurring work, labor hours is the biggest indicator to improving that contribution margin. And we have found with open book management, to your point, you need to do a lot of education before you can hand someone a P&L. And at the end of the day, how many lines on that P&L, let's say there's 50 to 100 lines on that P&L,
Yep.
can that individual actually impact themselves? And at the end of the day, the biggest one they can really impact is labor, and maybe the material too. But primarily it's labor and labor hours. So that's an area where we have put an incredible amount of focus and bonuses and incentivization and pay for performance, which is all about delivering labor hours. And I think that has led us to have a strong contribution margin, but still struggling at times to get that net profit margin to the point where we really want it. But at least our area of focus becomes a little bit more narrow. Instead of having to focus on labor, we can just run our labor variance report and see, as of right now, company-wide, we're like 98% of estimated hours versus actual. So we're saving 2% on our labor hours, which across 160 employees is actually meaningful. 2% is not a small amount when you add up all those hours and your billable rate. So
well, if you think about, if you think about you're struggling to, I forget what the number was, you're at 3 to 5% net profitability. Yeah. Another 2%. I mean, that's 50% of what you're making, But what you said really reminded me of one of my favorite client success stories. We have a client who was in the commercial security systems business. So it's a lot like a trades kind of business where you estimate a project and it requires guys and truck rolls and X number of hours and some materials. And, over a period of the last 20 years, up until we started working together, they had really struggled to get out of the low single digits in terms of profitability. Think like 0 to 5% net profit per year. And they always prided themselves on satisfying the customer. That seems like a good idea. And Cliff, in his video, which you can see at profitdoctor.com/results, I think, he told me that now they, based on what we're talking about, this labor utilization, or more specifically, tracking the hours, communicating that with the crews so that the crew is tracking to deliver the project, quote, on budget. They went from, we are committed to making sure the customer is satisfied, to we are committed to making sure the customer is satisfied, comma, profitably. And as it turns out, comma, profitably, and keeping track of, labor actuals versus labor budget resulted in, for them, a lift from basically low single digits to 20% plus net profitability. So in less than 9 months, they went from basically lowest on the food chain in terms of profitability to top of the stack in their industry. Because they're doing a lot of other things right, but that is one critical thing that for a lot of trades and probably landscaping as well, is like one of the biggest problems.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've seen that lift ourselves personally, and I've seen it in other companies.
Mhm.
Now, I just want to ask you a question on this. With the entrance of private equity into the trades industry, the term EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, deductions, and amortizations, has been very commonly used in place of net profit. What is your preference when you're measuring profitability in a company? And do you just ignore EBITDA? Do you have it as part of the conversation? I think it confuses a lot of people. I just wanted to address it before we moved on.
Yeah. EBITDA comes out of, Wall Street and big companies and private, as you're saying, private equity. I would say that it's much more applicable when you start approaching, several $100 million and up kinds of businesses. In the 1 million to 100 million, I don't know that I really love EBITDA. Sorry, I don't love EBITDA for that segment. I think net profitability or net operating profitability would be absolutely the way to go. You could even ask the Warren Buffetts of the world, why are you taking out depreciation? What kind of company doesn't need to maintain and fix its equipment? How can you pull that out? So short answer, I think the short answer you're looking for is, for the audience of this podcast, I would be using net profitability or net operating income and not EBITDA.
Awesome. And to dig into that one more level, I do talk to a lot of entrepreneurs out there, and they say, "Hey, look, my net profit is low, but don't tell the IRS this. But we do run a lot of our, we redid our roof in my kid's private school, in my so and so car through the business, so that's why it's low." Um, I, it's hard to, I don't want us to go out and give a bunch of tax advice here. So let's just say we're not going to give tax advice, but let's just say from a business and profitability, like cleanliness perspective, how do you handle that when you step into a business that has financials that are, let's just say, a bit messy?
Yeah. There's like 3 layers of that. The first one is, anytime a business owner tells me my P&L makes it, it's okay that my business doesn't show a profit, insert everything else that they say. To me, I usually think that is a smokescreen and a cover-up for poor profitability. And almost invariably, what's going on is they're telling themselves that instead of optimizing profitability. Now, my lawyer wants you to know that I'm not a tax accountant. And so I'm not going to give advice about whether or not you're going to run personal expenses through your business. I would hypothesize that about 100% of business owners are, to some extent or another. But let's just say it's a $10 million company and you're running $200,000 of your personal stuff through that, which I think is 2%. So maybe I'm not going to say that that's okay, but okay, now what? So if your net profitability shows 0 and you're like, yeah, but I'm running all this other stuff through there. Okay, great. Let's just set that in a little mini bucket and say, okay, this is what it is. My question then would be, what are you doing to get your other 8 or 13 points so that you're not in the doghouse with what you're doing? And so I think that in many cases, people combine a few things together and use it as like an excuse or a smokescreen, or it creates a distraction from what I would say the business owner should be doing, which is optimizing profitability. Do you think it'd be okay if we went back to that earlier question of why should we focus on profitability now, even if we're not planning on selling it or dying or having open heart surgery?
Let's do it.
Okay, well, there's a couple of good reasons. So first of all, let's say between now and the next 5 years, would you rather have a paycheck or a salary or whatever of $50,000 to $150,000 a year, or $550,000 a year? Like, it seems to me, if my business was more profitable, I'd be cashing more checks with more money to buy Porsches and invest in my Fidelity account and pay for my kids' college, or just put it in the bank, either invest for myself, or I don't know if you heard of these things called like tariffs or interest rates or economic dips or whatever. Maybe I'd like a little cushion. God forbid something went wrong and like people stopped working on fixing their homes because they were broken out of work or whatever for a year and a half. So there's that. And then I'll tell you that every time you make your business more profitable, what you're really doing is spending less energy, time, and money on things that are not working to focus more and more on things that work better or best. That is a business that's more fun to operate. That is a business that can grow more quickly and is way more profitable. So it's like by focusing on profitability, you're making your business better. So not only are you stacking chips for Porsches or rainy days, you're creating cushion so your business is going to be more stable and able to, take some punches if that's what happens. And you're just making your business better, smarter, faster, leaner, and I would say a lot more fun to run. So, and God forbid you ever do go to sell it, the person offering to buy your business is going to start with 5 times whatever your net profit is. So you have a choice. You can run a company for the next 5 years that's really sloppy on profit so that when you go to sell it, you can sell it for half price. And the person who buys it is like, this is going to be so great. I'm going to do stuff that the old owner was too sloppy, lazy, disorganized, or distracted to do. I'm going to double the value of the company that I just bought by doing the stuff he should have done or she should have done. And so what's happened is you get half price, you get twice the headaches for the next 5 years. And instead of putting in, let's just say, $500,000 a year extra into your Fidelity account, you don't. So, I guess the choice is yours. You do what you want.
Yeah, you make a pretty good argument for focusing on profitability. I think that's part of this problem is it's easier to focus on revenue. It's easier to go sell more. And a lot of CEOs, I believe, come from a place where all you could do is sell more to get to the next job and keep the crews working. And this is just an area that there's just not enough discussion on. There's not enough education on. There's not enough focus on. And so, Ben, that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, all right, we believe you, we hear you, and we're going to do it. We're going to focus on profitability next week. Let's talk about what that meeting looks like. If you can, maybe I'm going to go back to that question of your divisional leaders giving the P&L and profitability update every month versus maybe the CEO or CFO. What are some of those things that you see leading profitability companies doing that others just don't do?
Well, we talked about Money Mondays as the biggest first tool, which is recognizing you have a problem and dedicating time and energy to doing something about it. One of the next steps is being able to actually understand and measure and scope out the problem a little bit. You said, hey, we would get divisional leaders to present their P&L. I'll tell you the truth. I would hypothesize that 60% of the people listening to this, they themselves don't feel comfortable reading their own P&L. And it's a group problem. Accountants, surprisingly, do not think it's their job most of the time to produce a P&L. Or CPAs, accountants, bookkeepers, in many cases, do not see that it's their job for the CEO and the company to be more successful and for them to use their knowledge of finance and accounting to make it brain dead easy for that CEO or their management team to understand, read those financials, quickly get to the right conclusion and take action. They are often much more centered on how do we produce a report that is legally defensible for the IRS. And I'm not saying that that's not also a good idea, but I would rather have a report that a CEO can successfully run their business and make tons of money and will not worry about the IRS later, but will also worry about the IRS.
So we'll have the CPA focus on the IRS.
Say again?
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. I was
Uh,
saying let's let the CPA work on the IRS stuff, and let's let the
yeah,
CEO focus on profitability.
yeah, but I guess you're asking like what should happen. In that, let's say, monthly financial review, there should be a set of financials that is easy to understand and review and get to some useful outcomes with. And that typically requires a shift for the people who are producing it and a shift in education and capability for the people who are consuming it. So I'll use that as a little bit of a segue. We offer a program, we call it the Profit Doctor 180. It is a 6-month program. We guarantee that people will improve their profitability. Go into all the details on our website or schedule a conversation with me or whatever. But in there, among the things that we cover are, do you have a profitability problem? How to go about it, Money Mondays, how to restructure your financials and your contribution margin versus gross margin, whatever, so that you're actually measuring and having a good understanding of what's going on with profitability. And what we find is first we fix profitability, then we fix some of those measurements and cash flow stuff and financials and financial review sessions. But the coolest thing is in many cases, people can make a lot more money from the business that they already have, to basically keep more of what they're making, to go from underpaid to overpaid. And then once you clean things up a little bit, it often allows you to grow much quicker, faster, smoothly, more easily. And the growth that we show people how to get is not just more of the same, which for many people listening is resulting in a business that's not making very much money. Why have a business that's twice as big that makes no more money? That seems counterintuitive. But once you clean up what you've got, and let's say that's a money machine, and then you make it 50% bigger, now it's a 50% bigger money machine producing even 50% more. And that's where we love to help people get to.
That's great. And it does seem like turning your profit around first and then growing revenue second seems to be the order of events that should be employed here based on what you're saying. Because if we double our business and we're not fixing the profit issue, then we're just doubling the issue, which means even less time for the CEO to focus on profitability.
Yeah. And for those of you who are like, hey, I want to do right by my family, I want to do right by my employees and my customers, it's kind of a big fallacy out there that by not focusing on profitability, you're somehow the guy or gal who's a better boss or kinder or more generous to their employees or their customers. And I'll tell you, I just don't think that's true. Would you rather work at a company that's teetering on bankruptcy or a company that is like strong, profitable, and growing? That is a company that is going to give you more opportunities, is going to be able to invest in, I don't know, better equipment and good team members and stuff like that. And if you're a customer, do you want to be the customer of a plumbing company that can barely hang on to their staff, is about to go out of business at any time? They're going to come, they're going to redo all my plumbing, and a year from now, they're not going to be in business to support that? Or the people who they send out are the people who are like bottom of the barrel, couldn't get a job anywhere else, but because this company is so desperate, that's who they had? I don't want to be a customer of that company. I don't want to be an employee of that company. And I'll tell you, the family side, that story with Brian, don't you think his family breathed easier, was happier when Brian went from can't sleep, anxiety, panic attacks, tanking the family's financial future, to like got all that stuff handled, cool, calm, collected. Actually, they recently sold their company for a 7-figure exit check. Don't you think wife and kids picked up on dad's a better human when things were turned around? And so I think that being more profitable just cascades through, a river of goodness through all other parts of what's going on.
I completely agree with that. I think it's really, man, so many good points there, Ben. I believe when we're a more profitable business, we're just a better company to work for, and we can actually pay our employees better. So we have this mission, our BHAG right now. I know you've gotten to talk and meet Vern Harnish. I saw that on your Instagram. I saw Vern talk in 2015, and he explained this idea of a big, hairy, audacious goal and the Rockefeller habits and the scale up methodologies. I kind of grabbed onto that at a young age. Yeah, I could see the scale up book right behind you. And our current BAG is we want to achieve a $100,000 minimum wage in our company. Today, there's a lot of landscape operators that we compete with who pay minimum wage, whatever that is in California. I don't know exactly what it is because that's not our internal minimum wage, but we're working on getting that up. And if we're going to have any chance of achieving that crazy number, we are going to have to be and operate at a high profit margin. It's almost like this seesaw of upward mobility is like you get your profit margin to 20, 22%, and then you give your team a raise, and it pulls profit margin down super in a short period of time. Because I believe when you give people 5, 20, 30% raises, they want to go out and work and get after it even more for you. Efficiency, lack of waste. They're going to look for things to improve. That's going to drive your profitability back up. And I've always noticed this actually correlation with the more we pay, especially the people doing the work, the more profitable we seem to actually get because they start to care more about what's going on the job site. And I don't know if this applies to other industries. I think there probably is a correlation, but I know in the trades industries and in the landscape industry, the amount of excitement, happiness, engagement, fulfillment that your crews have directly correlates to their ability to meet the targets on labor hours and so on and so forth. So like, what's your thoughts on that? I just threw a bunch of stuff at you here.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces there. I don't want to stand here and say that you could have an infinitely high pay rate and still be a successful company. So I wouldn't say that. I would say that there needs to be an appropriate ratio between what you pay someone or invest in something and the value that it returns, right?
Yeah.
So let's just make it up. If you invest $1 of payroll and get $2 of value out of that in terms of benefit that they get to produce, well, then, I mean, let's just say that is a fair number to cover your overhead and end up with a profitable company. So if you have a way where instead of paying $1 to generate $2, we'll say per hour, it was paying $2 to generate $4 per value because that person was working better, smarter, faster, whatever. I mean, I think you're still maintaining the ratio, and that would sort of, quote, work for me, right? What I will say is that, you know, generally, if you're really serious about that $100,000 wage, it's going to cascade in a lot of ways. Like there's probably some commodity work out there where where it cannot be done profitably if you're paying like a guy with a hoe to dig a trench any more than $15 an hour, because that trench ain't worth more than $30 an hour to be dug, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So if that is the limiter on that, you're not going to be successful, I don't believe, trying to really up that person's wage for doing that kind of work. But maybe that suggests that, you know, instead of digging a trench that's worth $30 an hour, it needs to be, you know, instead of what would otherwise be dug by a backhoe in the middle of, you know, area here, it's like a guy with a fancy little trowel in a $10 million home where if you don't do it right, it monkeys up the prize begonias and then whatever, and now it's not worth $30 an hour. It's worth $300 an hour to that guy. And so now you don't have a sweaty guy with a baseball cap who doesn't speak English, like hammering with a hoe. You've got like white glove, whatever, looking perfect, you know, massaging your begonias, and maybe that is worth $100,000 a year, right? That's kind of getting ahead of myself on the analogy, but I guess where I'm going is, if you're going to raise the wage, somewhere in there the value's got to go up, and some of that is working better, smarter, faster, but some of that is who you're doing the work for and what work you're doing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And it's such a good point. And regardless of, let's put that $100,000 minimum wage goal to the side. Let's just go back to just general principles around profitability. Does this same concept apply? Do you see companies going after a service line that is just not going to ever support their overhead and the company they've built, and then adjusting that to a different type of service line, let's say from just strictly mowing lawns to then fertilizing those lawns? I mean, maybe it's a higher level technician doing work that you can charge more for. Is that some of those levers that you're looking to pull to increase profitability in a company?
Yeah, I think you should do this job. No, absolutely. Some of the biggest levers to be pulled, and if you get the profit leakage detector that we offer for free, a couple of the big ones talk about the customer, what kind of customer you're working with, and then what kind of services and products you're offering. So, we'll just say the low value commodity ditch digging there's not a lot of gravy to be had there. Whereas the high value product, which in your example was maybe fertilizing, I don't know if that's true, but a higher value, or maybe I wouldn't even just say higher value. I'll say something that matches up cleaner with what your company does and who your company does it for, right? Yeah. So there are companies that are well suited for commodity ditch digging, and I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't do it, but that's probably a company that should steer clear of trying to offer, Tyvek suit wearing begonia massagers, right? And so like Walmart, right? Walmart and Nordstrom are not the same company. Walmart is more like value, low cost, right? And let's say Nordstrom, as a metaphor, is high cost, high value stuff. I don't think Walmart should be carrying the products that normally go in Nordstrom, just like I don't think Nordstrom should be carrying the kind of products that would be in Walmart, right? So I don't know if I'd use the phrase pick your lane, but we invite people to double down on their sweet spots. Those are the types of customers and the kinds of products and services where they're especially good. And generally especially good means that for every dollar or hour of investment that they put into generating, producing, servicing, whatever that, they get a pretty darn good return, right? Versus something else that's not in their sweet spot that they tend not to be real successful with for so many reasons,
Such good advice, because I do think right now they're with social media and everything else, people are seeing other companies post about a service line and they go, we should be doing that too. That looks amazing. Look at the EBITDA multiples on that service line. And then they go start trying to sell more of that, even though they're Nordstrom and now they're trying to sell Walmart products and vice versa. And I think that might be a bit of a plague right now to shiny object CEOs like myself who are maybe chasing things for the wrong reasons. So I love this conversation. It brings it back to this foundational level of who we are and who we want to be. So Ben, I want to ask you this: is if I'm listening to this podcast and I'm just like, this sounds exactly what I need to be focusing on, but I don't have that leadership team. I don't have I don't know where to start. You mentioned, and we're going to put a link in here to the profit leak detector tool. What else do you offer in terms of helping companies do that profit 180 and get back to a place where they can be happy and sleep well again at night?
Yeah. Well, there's a free tool, as you mentioned, the profit leakage detector. It's kind of like a self-assessment. If you sign up for it and download it, also comes with a few videos to just kind of walk you through how to fill it out properly. That helps you just identify where and maybe how badly you might have some profitability leaks. We also offer a Profit 180, which is our key program to help 7- and 8-figure businesses add at least 5 points of additional profitability. And just to put that in context, if you're a $2 million a year revenue business, another 5 percentage points of net profitability is like generating another $100,000 a year of extra profitability or pay for you as the owner. So over 5 years, that would be $500,000 of extra profitability. And if you were to ever try to sell that or value the business, that would add roughly another $500,000 of value to that business. So the Profit 180 is incredibly effective at helping 7- and 8-figure companies improve their profitability. Again, we kind of covered some of the most free and first step type tools, like identifying, do you have a profit problem? Once you know you have that, trying to sell your way out of a profit problem rarely works. So what I would recommend is Mondays, an hour or two a week. You and your leadership team, God forbid 4 hours, start hammering on profitability. And once you kind of tune up some of your profitability, then it makes it easier to grow. Then growth adds value. You know, if you're at low single-digit profitability, how is another $1 million of revenue going to help you? You know, people often think, well, that $1 million is going to come to me at my gross profit percentage, which is like 50%. So it's really going to add a lot. The problem is you're not going to get that other $1 million in revenue for free. You're going to do more of what you've been doing to generate the millions of dollars that you already have. And since that's averaging about zero, why is that next million going to somehow, like, you're going to have to, fight for it, right? It's not like it's just going to come to you so easy. And so how is it that that next million is going to be so much cheaper to acquire than the last million? We kind of joke is a wrong word. We try to help people understand when they have our classic profititis, Justin, high profit at 20 million, 10% net profit at 20 million, 5% net profit at 24 million. And they're thinking if we could just get to 26 million, it'd fix all our problems. And you're like, wait a minute. You were doing better when you were smaller. How is going to be bigger going to fix that problem? And the answer is it usually doesn't.
Yeah. Well, Ben, I've enjoyed this conversation and I've got some notes and some takeaways myself. This is one of the reasons, guys, I do this podcast so I can learn something too. So this has been great. And Ben, I end the show asking for a trade secret from all of our guests, something that they've learned over the years. Maybe it's a myth that you can bust today for us, but I'll ask you that to wrap the show up. What's a trade secret you want to leave our guests with today?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I already landed some good nuggets, Money Mondays, focusing on profit. You can't, grow your way out of a profit problem, that sort of thing. What I'll say is the single most important tool, once you've really dug into what the heck is going on, knowing what's happening, is instead of, in order to improve profitability quickly, that is what we call the 50-20 rule. So let's pretend that we have gone through the profit leakage detector and identified that our services line, we offer, let's say, 20 different kinds of services, whether it's lawn care or plumbing or whatever, right? We replace water heaters, we replace toilets, we troubleshoot for leaks, I don't know, all the other stuff that a plumber might do, right? And we looked at these and we realized that the services that we offer, the portfolio, is one of our weakest areas where we have a lot of profit leakage. The single fastest, best way to tackle that, trade secret alert, is what we call the 50-20 rule, which is to cut half of the worst 20% in that area in the next 30 days. So let's go back to plumbing because it just shows how little I know about plumbing. Let's say there's replacing water heaters, replacing toilets, changing out faucets, and, some other stuff, right? So if we identify that fixing a drippy faucet and repairing, not replacing a toilet that runs are things that are some of our worst services in terms of profitability, I would say if we identified those two, and those were the bottom 20%, how could you at least cut one of them within 30 days? And so let's pretend that we can easily cut the drippy faucets because replacing the whole thing is only $400 instead of a $50 pipe, screw. Whereas we got to so we can cut the sink, but for some reason, cutting the running toilet service is hard. It's like, just take the easy ones. Cut cut half of those worst 20% right away. And so I guess my point is cutting from the bottom is the fastest tool to improving profitability once you've identified an area that is like a problem area.
I love this. And this is, again, why I would advocate to find someone you can work with as a CEO. If you are a CEO, finding someone, whether it's, yourself, Ben, or someone else, is like, finding someone to help you with this stuff is so key, because it's really, really easy to find this. And I think it's easy to go find this cut. It's really hard to then go cut it. And to make that decision, you have to have someone in your corner helping you to make and hold these decisions. It's easy to do for the first month. It's really hard to do for a year. And I think that's where most CEOs will fail implementing a lot of what you said today, is that they'll do it for the month of July or whenever they're listening to this, but then they go back to this distracted CEO that they always have been. I mean, that is my history. That is why I've always had a coach for the last 10 years, is because it's really hard to execute this stuff. So
I might just share, let's just take landscaping and pretend it's a proxy for, plumbing and cabinetry and installing doors and replacing flooring or whatnot. How many people who own a company that installs flooring in homes or small businesses, started that journey as a CFO or finance expert?
Almost probably zero.
Nearly zero. Most of those people started in the trade itself. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. It just suggests that many of those people are not wired the same as that, we'll just say, business consultant, right? Yep. And it's unlikely that any CEO is going to be excellent at everything. And just like they think, well, I'm probably not going to learn how to be a CPA, so I'm going to hire a CPA. I'll just say this thing about profit optimization. It's a very narrow specialization. Most CFOs, most CPAs do not specialize in this. That's why so many of my clients already have CFOs, already have CPAs, still have the problem. So as you said, having a coach can be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I just think at least 2/3 of CEOs are just not wired, out of the box, to be profit optimizers. 1/3 is, but then another third is sort of average on profitability, and 1/3 is not so strong there. So I just invite you guys to, go get some help.
Awesome. Well, let's end it there. Ben, thank you so much for everything today. Appreciate what you're doing. We're going to have a link to your website, to your socials, and to that free tool in the notes below. Other than that, have a great, fantastic rest of your day. And thanks for coming on Trades Talk.
Thanks, Justin. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to Trades Talk, where the next generation of disruptors comes to raise the bar. If you got value from today's episode, share it with someone in the trades who's ready to level up. For more tools, insights, and community, follow host Justin White and join the movement at jwhitegroup.com.